Hello again, rail fans, and happy holidays. As you can see, today's video is going to be a little bit different, but still pretty interesting. As over the weekend of December 3rd, 2022, there were some unusual events that occurred along the Brooksville sub that, as you might know, is the closest trackage to my house. So in this video, we're going to look at exactly what happened that would lead to a catch that's definitely a candidate for Best of the Year. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it out for all the late night events that would lead to this occurrence, so I'll be using a lot of maps, timetable pages, and images from friends that helped keep me informed on this local. All image credits will be in the video and in the description below. But without further ado, I present to you 3 crews, 1 local, L781-06. It all begins in Bensenville, Illinois, right outside of Chicago. This is a railroad frenzy all day, every day, and also the spot where Tampa's ethanol shipments begin their journey south after transferring off the Canadian Pacific Railway. It's the very end of the festivities of Thanksgiving when B631 gets a crew and departs Bensenville southbound. About 4 days later, our B631 ran down the S-line and arrived in Tampa the morning of Tuesday, November 29th. Now, when I say arrived in Tampa, I mean Yeoman Yard, which is the freight yard for all of Tampa's commerce. From there, a yard crew, usually under the symbol of R642, will take the loaded ethanol train south the last couple miles to the port on Tampa Bay. From there, they drop the train of loads and come back to Tampa, engines light. Sometimes they do bring an empty consist back to Yeoman, but in today's case, the power returned light. Now is a good time to introduce our 2 locomotives of honor, Canadian Pacific 9373 and Union Pacific 8143, both GE 6-axle units. These 2 engines would draw some attention from local rail fans, but obviously not enough, as the same day they arrived in Tampa, they were put into local service and onto our Brooksville local L781, in this case L781-29. The 2 engines silently departed the yard at 11:30 p.m. that night after acting like a yard job, switching Yeoman for almost 3 hours before departing north up the sub. That would be a big mistake for crew hour management, as with 3 industries to switch including Cemex, which is back in the woods of Brooksville, the crew would probably not have enough time for the round trip. Just as suspected, Wednesday morning came around and L781-29 never returned to Yeoman. The crew had run out of hours just after 5 a.m. that morning and had tied down the power somewhere along the sub. Now it was just a matter of who would find it first. Wednesday afternoon rolled around and photos of the 2 engines were posted onto a railfan group showing the 2 novelties basking in the sun tied on a spur, just north of Ayers near Spring Hill. Big thanks to Terrell Sally for these photos and the information. He'd go out later that evening to take some really good pictures of the engines under the moonlight. From Wednesday to Sunday, the locomotives would sit here on the spur until CSX sent out a crew bus from Tampa to bring it back to Yeoman. I still do not know the reasoning of it. CSX bussed a yard crew all the way from Tampa to move the train 20 miles south to Lando Lakes, where once again they tie the train down and leave it. I have no idea what the reasoning behind this was, but apparently all the yard crew did, now running under the symbol of Y193, took the engines around the sub to switch customers late Sunday night and somehow managed to make the consist head-to-head and leave the entire 30-car train just north of Tibbetts Lumber as to not block any crossings. So on Monday morning, the update and photo of 781 sitting in Lando Lakes was posted, which began to confirm my suspicions that CSX was going to use the Tuesday night job to bring it back to Tampa. About 36 hours later, another post from Terrell showed the train in the same spot, now on Tuesday night around 5:30 p.m. This was the last hint CSX would give us rail fans. At this point, I presume that CSX was either going to have the new L781-06 crew take an engine from Yeoman and pick up the stranded train, or they were going to bus a crew north. The decision would end up being the latter option, but I wouldn't figure this out until about 30 minutes after L781 was on board and getting their train ready for its southbound trek. It's currently just after 8 p.m. now on Tuesday, December 6th, marking an entire week that this power has been stranded on the subdivision. Driving to the tracks, my radio would pick up some chatter from the crew checking the air of the train, guaranteeing that tonight was the night that CSX planned to bring this fiasco of a local back home. and only a few minutes later, L781-06 would dial up the JF dispatcher for their odd EC1.
EC1 number 90550. Today's date 12/06/22. Location SR 826.7. Train of the L781-06. 9373. Chloe TW Martin. Circle on 1A Alberta main track south direction. From the SR 825.0 main track to NAS TN main track.
Correct time 2026 JFC.
026 JFC.
At last, with his third crew and his final EC1, L781-06 would depart southbound a week after it entered the sub. The departure would lead us back here to a favorite spot, McDonald's and Lutz, where cops were closing a lane of traffic of US 41, only adding to the frenzy of action along these usually quiet rails. At exactly 8:30 p.m., L781-06 would pass on the last leg of his southbound trip to Tampa. By far, one of the most mystifying but incredible trains that I've ever documented. L781 would lug his 30 cars south and soon reach Yeoman, where the power would be shuffled around for an outbound ethanol departure. But the odd events along the subdivision wouldn't end here, as for the past 5 days, none of the industries, like Cemex and 84 Lumber, received cars. Cemex can receive anywhere from 30 to 80 cars a week, with the Spring Hill Industrial Park seeing about 15 cars in a 7-day span. Apparently, CSX didn't want to wait a day to send out the extra long train up the sub, so on Wednesday, December 7th, 2 massive 6-axle rebuilds brought a 40-car train north from Tampa. We were completing some errands in Lutz when at 7:45 p.m., U781-07 showed up, triggering the crossing gates of Land O'Lakes with their second train in less than 24 hours, which on this sub never happens. This train is usually L781, as you know, so how come today it's U781? Well, ever since the change in CSX's system-wide symbol changes, locals will now carry a U prefix in place of the L when they're running on an alternate schedule or an extra job. Today would be the latter, as Wednesday night locals are extremely uncommon and extras if anything. All 4 customers north of Lutz would get cars tonight, making for a long night for the crew, as they did return to Tampa early Thursday morning with only minutes of their 12-hour shift left. It would take a couple days for the sub to begin operating under its normal schedule again after a week-long hiatus from regularity. And so, this is where our story ends, back in Lutz where we started. I hope you all who finished this very detailed video enjoyed it, and I hope to see you all again soon. But until we meet again trackside, this is Christian from Multicolor Films. End of transmission.